Hello and welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm continuing my series on the Bach Inventions today. This is invention number 12 in A major. This is a very energetic and enjoyable dance-like variation, and one of the more complicated ones. Not necessarily an invention that you would want to start with if you were getting into these pieces. There's a lot of issues with coordination, which are quite tricky to work out, and it helps if you've already developed a very comfortable ability to play trills and various scalar passages well before you jump into this one. This invention is structured a little bit differently than all the previous ones that we've looked at so far. I think I've made videos so far on 8, 14, and 13. In this one, there's no canonical treatment as in number 8 or number 13 or the end of number 14. Instead, we get two distinct, very distinct melodic ideas that are always found together when they appear. So there is this idea with ornaments and repeated notes, which starts in the right hand at the beginning of the invention. And then there's this left-hand idea with these kind of rolling scales that and arpeggios that descend the keyboard. And as I said, they always go together, but of course, in typical Bach style, he does invert them so that the right-hand motive here will appear on the left hand and vice versa. Now, since a lot of people might not have seen some of these ornaments before, I think it's worth mentioning how they're performed. We're very lucky to have a little table of ornaments in Bach's own hand that he prepared for his son Wilhelm Friedemann. So you can see that the first ornament here on the first notes is a mordent. It's called a mordent. This derives from the Italian word for teeth or to bite. So mordents were generally a rapid ornament. It's the printed note plus the note directly beneath it in the appropriate scale. So in this case, we're in the key of A major. So that means that the keyboard player should play an A plus a G sharp, the note that's directly below an A in the key of A major. So far so good. And then we have this very odd ornament over the long-held B. And this is an ornament which you, I think, very rarely see outside of Bach's music, although other composers of this time did use this ornament. You'll occasionally find it. So on Bach's table of ornaments, he refers to this as a doppelt Kadens und Mordent. And please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing this correctly. I'm not a native German speaker or anything, or Italian speaker for that matter either. We kind of have a little mixture of both languages going on here. Basically how this works is that we have a trill, a basic idea of a trill. And so for Bach, a trill would normally start with the note above the printed note. So a kind of an extension of an appoggiatura or an accented dissonance. But in this case, there's also a prefix before the trill starts. So two notes leading up to the note above the printed note. So in Bach's example, of course, he has a C written there. So you start with a B, the note below, you go to a C, and then the trill properly starts on the D above the C. This particular ornament's even more complicated because we also have a suffix. At the end, we have a little tail, a little turn at the end. So it's the exact same notes that started this ornament, the B and the C, are again repeated to end it. And this creates a little finishing touch to the whole ornament. I think you would normally imagine that this ornament would be found in cases where there is perhaps a falling motive after the trill. So normally in Bach's table, for example, if this was written on a C, you probably would imagine that the next note would be a B and that this little turn at the end would connect you to that next lower tone on the scale, kind of like this. Now this, of course, does not happen in this case, and this is one of the things which is so tricky about this particular invention. We do go to the note below eventually, but only after we've connected to this tied B on the next downbeat. You'll hear people approach this ornament in different ways. You can stop the trill early with the little turn at the end, or another method which, as I've thought about it since recording the invention, I might even like better, is if you treat the tie as simply the end of the trill. So in that case, the last two notes of this ornament would be kind of shifted so that the last note comes is synonymous with the B 16th note, which is tied on the downbeat of bar 2. In that case, we don't really hear a tie. It's more that the trill is taking up the entire value of the dotted half note and the tied 16th. So that version would kind of sound like this. And the more I think about it, the more I kind of prefer that. When I recorded this, which was a little while ago, I did something a little different, which was that I ended the trill slightly early. I ended at an 8th note early on the previous bar, and then tied the note over into the next measure. And that also works perfectly fine. It has a perfectly nice sound. You could also choose to end the trill anytime you wanted, really. If you wanted to end it on the 4th beat of bar 1, or even earlier. You could do a very short trill if you wanted to. And some slightly more eccentric pianists do exactly that. The main thing is that all those little components of the trill, prefix and the suffix, are there. Now, as you can see in a lot of the sources, the mordents are kind of inconsistently applied to these notes. And I don't really think that this means they're supposed to be omitted randomly on some of them and played on others. I think Bach probably meant that all of them should have mordents, but he just was a little bit inconsistent about writing them into his manuscript. You'll oftentimes see this from composers of the time, that once they'd established kind of a pattern for something like this, they would kind of leave it to your own judgment to continue that pattern if you so desire. So although you certainly don't have to put mordents on all these, you could kind of just freely omit them as they're notated, or even come up with a different pattern of your own. I think the motive makes the most sense if you hear them every single time, so I've added these mordents every time that they occur. And we could imagine that a little passage like this episode, where you have in very close connection this motive traded between left and right hands, this would have been very effective in Bach's day on a 2-manual harpsichord, where the harpsichordist could have each keyboard attached to a different set of strings, thereby rendering the timbre very different between the left and right hands. I've tried to approximate that in my performance here as best I could. Careful fingering is important. As I stated in my video on Bach's Invention number 14, I also don't like to shy away from using my 4th and 5th fingers in the left hand. In some of these really tricky left-hand passages like 19 to 20, I actually go out of my way to use the 4th and 5th fingers in places where it would be possible to avoid them if you really wanted to. And it seems right to me at the very end to include a little bit of an extra cadential trill and a mordent on the last note, very much in the style of the entire piece, since we've had these mordents all along and trills that are so important to the main motive. But also it was rather expected of performers at this time that you would embellish slightly at cadence points and add a cadential trill where it was appropriate. Composers at the time didn't even really bother writing those things in. It was just so normal. All right, I hope you enjoyed this little video on this invention. I'll have another one coming up soon enough. Until then, take care, keep practicing hard, and I'll see you next week.